Chapter 2. I let voicemail pick up. The sound of Mom's voice always reminds me that there are very good reasons why I'm living the party girl life here and not living the non-party girl life over there. 4 reasons to leave England in ascending order of importance. 1. Mom. Migraine prone. Migraines caused by such terrifying prospects as driving into multi-story car park at Heathrow Airport, taking a holiday abroad because she might have to drive into multi-story car park to get plane because planes leave from airports, which generally include multi-story car parks, remembering she's an American, sending a fax, sending a postcard, thinking about the idea of learning how to send an email, living at our house in rural Northamptonshire, living in London. In other words, everything. The result is that Mom, who always calls herself Mummy because it's more British, quote unquote, is obsessed with controlling her only daughter's life. A professional mom and a stunningly unembarrassed snob, she's fixated on the British aristocracy, their interior decorating style, and the brand of Wellington boots they wear. Les Chameaux, leather-lined. Her ambition was to marry me off to someone British and aristocratic. Parentheses, a career wasn't part of her plan, but it was part of mine. The ideal candidate was the boy next door, the son of the local peer, the Earl of Swire. Julie could never understand why I hated Mom's idea so much. She always said she'd do anything to marry a guy with an English castle, but then she has no idea how damp they get in winter. Our house sits on the border of the 25,000-acre estate of Swire Castle. Quote-unquote next door, for the English upper classes, means a 20-minute drive. Ever since I can remember, every time we motor by the castle gates, Mom would explain, as though she just that minute thought of it. Little Earl is just your age. He's the most eligible man in Northamptonshire. Parentheses, she was describing her 6-year-old neighbor whom I'd never actually met. Mom, I'm 5.5. You have to be 16 to get married, I said. Start young. You're going to be the most beautiful girl, and you're going to marry little Earl next door and live in the pretty castle, which is much grander than any of your relations' castles. Mom. It's Mummy. Stop saying Mom and talking that unflattering American accent, or no one will ever marry you. My accent was a replica of Mom's. I couldn't change it just like she couldn't. The difference was I didn't want to. I wanted a more American accent, even at 5.5. Mummy, why do you always say that all our relations live in castles when only one of them does? Because the others died, darling. When? Very recently, in the Wars of the Roses. One of our relations did have a castle near Aberdeen. We visited the Honorary William Courtenay, my father's aging great-uncle, every Christmas. His grandsons, Archie and Ralph, pronounced inexplicably Rafe in England, were also on Mom's short list of future husbands, their considerable inheritances making up for their lack of titles. Mom told me that everyone in America wished they got to go to a real Scottish castle for a Christmas vacation. I never quite believed her. I mean, who wants to spend 5 days in a house colder than the North Pole when they could be at Disney World? After 6 Arctic Christmases, I developed a phobia of country houses that I doubt will ever leave me. Most of the time I fantasized about being Jewish, so we could forget the whole Christmas thing altogether. Mom's marital ambitions for me came up in almost every childhood conversation I can remember. The way other parents go on at their kids about getting into college or not taking drugs. I remember being about 10 years old and we had a very tense talk over breakfast. Darling, when are you going to go around to Swire Castle and have tea with little Earl? I hear he's very handsome. He'd fall in love with you if he met you, said Mom. Mom, you know that no one's seen the Swire since Daddy sold the Earl of Swire those chairs, I replied. Shh, all that was a long time ago. I'm sure the Earl and the Countess have forgotten all about it. Anyway, Mom, everyone says they moved away. No one's seen them for years, I said, exasperated. Well, I'm sure they visit. How could anyone abandon a house that beautiful, that dome, those capability brown grounds? Next time you're here, let's call... Can we not, please? I replied, even though I was secretly a little curious about the castle and its owners. Mom was in complete denial about two rather significant facts. First, that the Squires had divorced about 4 years before. The mysterious Countess was famous for her affairs. And the Earl and his little boy seemed to have vanished. Second, that ever since my father, who was always chasing a new bargain, sold the Earl 4 Chippendale chairs that turned out to be fakes, the two families had been on non-speaks. The chair affair, as it was dubbed by the local newspaper, was a typical English village feud destined never to be resolved. Although the chairs were returned and my father repaid the money and apologized in writing to the furious Earl, saying that he had been duped by his suppliers, the Earl refused to believe him. He let it be known that he distrusted Dad and wanted nothing to do with him. The Countess naturally sided with her husband. Mom naturally sided with Dad. Everyone in the village naturally sided with the Squires, as was tradition, thereby increasing their chances of being invited to the big house for dinner. Mom, desperate to be friends with them, tried to make amends with the Squires. However, when she invited them to her annual summer drinks party, they declined. When Christmas came around, there was no invitation to the castle for Boxing Day lunch. At church, the Countess publicly snubbed Mom by moving pews when Mom sat at the end of hers. Mom found the whole affair so socially embarrassing that she eventually started pretending it had never happened. Mom always hoped everything would be forgotten, but the village thrived on the story and wouldn't let it go. Honestly, in small English villages, people have lifelong feuds over the dumbest stuff, like the size of their cabbages or what kind of tree their neighbors planted on the boundary. Parentheses, oaks are acceptable. Conifers will precipitate legal proceedings. Close parentheses. It's a tradition. I think it keeps them going through the long winter nights. After the divorce, the castle was run as a conference center, although the family kept a wing for themselves. The Earl was rumored to occasionally appear alone and then vanish. The older I got, the more Mom's attitudes annoyed me. When I said, "I'm going to have a career and marry for love if I do. You marry Dad for love," she replied without missing a beat, "Exactly. Don't do anything as silly as that." To be fair to Mom, she had tried to stick to her principles and not marry for love. Before she was a professional mom, she was a professional brown signer. A brown signer is a woman who is interested exclusively in British men with houses that have brown signs outside. I'll explain. The only way the British aristocracy can afford to go on living in their huge, beautiful houses is if they open them to the public. A sign that is generally brown with white lettering is placed on the closest highway to direct the public to the house. The brown signs often have a cute little icon of a stately home on them. Only very large houses have brown signs because if your house is small, you can afford the repairs and upkeep yourself. But if your roof is 16 square acres, financial aid is required every time a tile comes loose. So, quite ironically, although a brown sign is an indication of too little money to mend a roof, it is also a reverse status symbol. Because if you don't have enough money to mend your roof, that means you must have a vast roof. And we all know what's underneath a vast roof, a vast house. You'd be surprised how many girls want a man with a brown sign. Brown signers are cunning, leggy, international beauties from Manhattan, Paris, and London, who pose as uncunning things like handbag designers, actresses, and artists. It's perfect cover because no one would ever imagine that a fabulous girl with a modern career would swap it for something as retro as a brown sign. It makes no sense at all. I mean, it would be the moral equivalent of swapping the new Prada shoe for last season's. Before a date, brown signers do their homework. They look up the man in Debrett's Peerage and Baronetage, a British guidebook that lists Brits of high birth, plus their addresses. If the house has a "the" in front of it, e.g. the Priory or the Manor, it is more likely to have over 20 rooms and a brown sign. Regardless of his looks, mind, hair quantity, or neck measurement, the brown signer is in love with the proprietor of the brown sign before she has closed her debrettes and curled her eyelashes. Mom was an American brown signer posing as a student. It was the 70s and she couldn't get out of the Upper East Side quick enough. Her destination, London's Chelsea College of Art, the perfect hunting ground. Mom thought she was getting the manor at Ashby under Little Slaithamdale by marrying Dad, which she did practically the day after he'd taken her to dinner at Annabelle's in Berkeley Square and driven her home in his Jaguar XJS, which was apparently a very cool car back then. After the wedding, she discovered that although he has aristocratic roots, Dad was about 13th in line for the manor at Ashby under Little Slathomdale. The Jaguar was borrowed. Mom blamed the confusion on her being an American because Americans trust guidebooks like Debrett's as much as they trust the Michelin Blue Guide. That's when the migraine started. Mom realized that not only was she married to a not very rich man, she was in love with him too. It wasn't what she wanted. I say, complain not when you've saved yourself a life sentence like renting out the manor at Ashby under Little Slathomdale every time you want to send a letter. I don't think Mom agrees. She renamed our house, which was originally called Vicarage Cottage, the old rectory at Stibley-on-the-Wold, which is a very grand title for a 4-bedroom house. It isn't exactly old. Whenever I ask Mom why everyone else calls the village just Stibley, she says it's because no one in the village knows their correct address. Speaking of long names, this reminds me. 2. Toffs. The main reason to avoid a brown sign is because it comes with an aristocrat known fondly as a toff in Britain. Toffs call their palaces dumps, wear sweaters with holes in them darned by their ancient nannies, whom they love more than any other woman in their lives, and really do call sex shagging a la Austin Powers. Amazingly, a lot of English girls tolerate the toff in return for the house and the title. Personally, I think it would be beyond exhausting to have a title like the Marchioness of Dufferin and Ava or Alice, Duchess of Drumlandrig. It's bad enough signing checks with a name with 2 parts, let alone 5 or 6. But to some women, a 6-part name and a toff are worth all the sacrifices, like absolutely no central heating allowed, ever. Seriously, the British aristocracy actually think heating is low class. I've always thought this is unfair to people like me who get cold easily. Mom often said when I was a kid that she'd be happier if I died of pneumonia in a historic 4-poster bed at 29 than if I lived to be 85 in a centrally heated house. That's one of the reasons I was allergic to Mom's idea of the boy next door. I just didn't know if being an American designed to thrive in balmy artificial heat, my fragile constitution would survive the low temperatures associated with the tough marriage. 3. Dad. Dad describes himself as an antiques entrepreneur, but he's so entrepreneurial that he's totally gullible about any bargain, including those fake Chippendales he sold to the Earl. He was so cross about the whole affair that we could never mention it. In fact, no one in the house really spoke about chairs of any type when they were around Dad. 4. Brazilians. When I first moved to New York after college, this cute guy, a 27-year-old movie director, parentheses, who'd never actually directed a movie, told me I, quote, needed a Brazilian here, end quote. Considering the position of his head at the time, which I'm way too polite to reveal, I thought it was très peculiar that he was proposing that a man of Latin origin should put his head in the same place. Chad, I said, why would you want a Brazilian here as well as you? I mean, not to be racist or anything, but one foreigner at a time. There's too much hair down here for a New Yorker like me. Would a Brazilian be more suited to this than you, I asked. You don't know what a Brazilian is, do you? It's a person like Ricky Martin. Duh, Ricky Martin's French. A Brazilian's a wax. You need one real bad. Chad insisted I visit the J Sisters the next morning at 35 West 57th Street, which is where I discovered the true meaning of the word Brazilian. It's a bikini wax that involves waxing virtually everything off the place where Chad had had his head. On the pain scale is right up there with unfriendly things like cervical biopsies, so entre nous, next time I will get an epidural first. Chad was thrilled with the new Brazilian. Most men are, I've subsequently discovered. Ironically, it was to be the cause of our breakup. He wanted his head to be near it constantly, which got a bit much after a while. Then he started doing creepola things like spontaneously booking appointments for me with the J Sisters and getting overly upset if I canceled. Parentheses, no one has a pain threshold to tolerate a Brazilian every week. No one. Close parentheses. That's when I started to suspect that I don't have quite as good taste in men as I do in shoes. A man whose affections are swayed by the shallow charms of a bikini wax wasn't exactly what I wanted. I had to end it. Only a really superficial person would break up over a fucking $55 wax, said Chad when I told him. Chad, it's fucking, I said. Chad was totally not into received pronunciation, which is the one British habit this American girl never kicked. I thought the way he spoke was cute, actually, but I couldn't help correcting him. There's fucking nothing more fucking annoying than going out with ya. Well, then you must be happy that I'm leaving you, I said, trying not to get upset. A girl's more than the sum of her parts, Chad. Even though there were things I missed about Chad, the Brazilian was the start of many useful beauty tips. I was relieved it was over. I mean, he wasn't exactly an honest person. Ricky Martin is actually from Puerto Rico, not France, as Chad insisted he was. And if you look at the globe, you'll see Puerto Rico is much closer to Brazil than to France. Still, the one gift Chad gave me was the Brazilian. I couldn't survive without it now. Apparently, it's the secret weapon of the most glamorous women in the world. And I would never tell Chad this after everything that happened, but if I were a man, I probably wouldn't want to date a woman who hadn't had a Brazilian either. So, although I didn't know about Brazilians until after I had left the English countryside, had I known about them before I decided to leave, it would definitely have made me go. Therefore, retrospectively, I can add Brazilians to my list of reasons to move to Manhattan.